Every great city has a financial district. New York has Wall Street. London has the City. Tokyo has Marunouchi. These places concentrate banks, investment firms, and corporate headquarters because modern economies naturally organize themselves around specialized districts where businesses benefit from proximity. Economists call this phenomenon clustering, one of the key drivers of productivity, innovation, and long-term economic growth. But in the center of Vietnam's capital, that same principle has been operating for nearly 1,000 years. At first glance, Hanoi's Old Quarter appears wonderfully chaotic. Thousands of scooters weave through narrow streets while storefronts spill onto crowded sidewalks beneath faded yellow facades. Electrical wires stretch overhead, food vendors squeeze between workshops, and nearly every meter of space is devoted to commerce. To a first-time visitor, the neighborhood looks like an organic maze shaped by centuries of growth rather than deliberate planning. Yet beneath that apparent disorder lies one of the world's most organized commercial systems. Walk through the Old Quarter, and a pattern begins to emerge. One street is filled with jewelry workshops where goldsmiths and silversmiths continue crafts perfected over generations. Another specializes in religious supplies, while nearby streets focus on hardware, traditional medicine, bamboo products, fabrics, kitchen equipment, or metal tools. Even today, despite tourism, international brands, and modern retail, many streets remain dominated by businesses selling the same category of goods. This is no coincidence. For centuries, these roads were known as the 36 Guild Streets, although the actual number changed as trades emerged and disappeared. Their Vietnamese names often begin with Hong, meaning goods, followed by the product that defined the street. Hong Bac became Silver Street. Hong Gai became Silk Street. Hong Thiek specialized in tin products, while Hong Ma became famous for ceremonial paper offerings. Long before zoning laws existed, Hanoi had developed an urban economy where entire neighborhoods specialized in particular industries. It would be easy to assume this system belongs to the past, that these names survive only as historical curiosities. After all, economies change. Industries rise and fall. Technologies transform production, and cities replace old commercial districts with new ones. Yet Hanoi followed a different path. Although products have evolved and traditional workshops now stand beside cafes, hotels, and modern retailers, the logic behind the Old Quarter still shapes business today. Customers associate certain streets with certain industries. Suppliers remain concentrated in specific districts. Families continue running workshops passed down through generations, while commercial relationships built centuries ago have adapted rather than disappeared. What looks like a preserved historic neighborhood is actually a living commercial ecosystem that continues creating economic value. This persistence has fascinated historians and urban economists alike. The principles behind Hanoi's Old Quarter closely resemble modern theories of industrial clustering, knowledge spillovers, supply chain efficiency, and localized specialization. Governments now spend billions trying to create innovation districts where companies benefit from proximity. Hanoi achieved something remarkably similar centuries before economists could explain why it worked. Understanding how this happened requires looking beyond the crowded streets of today. The Old Quarter was not designed by a planner or created through royal decree. It emerged gradually as craftsmen, merchants, religious communities, and village networks made countless individual decisions that, over centuries, produced an economic system resilient enough to survive dynasties, colonial rule, revolution, and globalization without losing the structure that first gave it life. To understand why Hanoi's economy still beats to the rhythm of its ancient guild streets, we must travel back nearly 1,000 years to the founding of a new capital, where the commercial neighborhoods growing outside the imperial citadel would become one of the world's longest-lasting examples of urban specialization. When Hanoi's Old Quarter began to take shape, it was not yet called Hanoi. In 1010, Emperor Lý Thái Tổ made one of the most important decisions in Vietnamese history by moving the royal capital from Hoa Lu to a broad plain along the Red River, where geography offered far greater opportunities for political expansion and trade. According to Vietnamese chronicles, the emperor saw a dragon rising from the river as his royal barge approached the site and named the new capital Thang Long, ascending dragon. Whether legend or symbolism, the location proved ideal, connecting fertile farmland with waterways linking northern Vietnam to Southeast Asia and southern China. Unlike capitals built mainly around military power or royal administration, Thang Long quickly became a commercial center. The Red River carried agricultural products, ceramics, timber, metals, silk, and countless other goods into the growing city. Boats also brought craftsmen whose specialized skills became increasingly valuable as the imperial court demanded buildings, temples, weapons, textiles, jewelry, furniture, paper, and other necessities. These artisans rarely arrived alone. Across northern Vietnam, villages had long specialized in particular crafts refined over generations. Some became known for bronze casting, others for lacquerware, silk weaving, ceremonial paper, woodworking, herbal medicine, bamboo products, or silverwork. Skills were usually passed down within families, giving entire villages reputations for mastering specific trades. As opportunities emerged in the new capital, craftsmen from the same villages migrated together, bringing not only technical knowledge but also trusted social networks. Rather than scattering across the city, they settled near one another. Living and working together allowed craftsmen to cooperate, share resources, train apprentices, and maintain ties with their home communities. Geography reinforced this pattern, since similar trades relied on the same suppliers, materials, and customers. Silversmiths benefited from neighboring metalworkers. Textile merchants clustered with dyers and tailors, while paper merchants stayed close to religious institutions that depended on their products. Over time, these practical choices reshaped the city's geography. Entire streets developed distinct commercial identities because concentration created advantages that isolated workshops could not match. Customers knew exactly where to buy silk or silver. Traders could compare products from multiple workshops in one place, while suppliers reduced costs by serving many businesses located side by side. Every new workshop strengthened the district, creating a cycle in which specialization attracted even more specialization. Modern economists call this an industrial cluster, but the craftsmen of medieval Thang Long understood its value through experience. They discovered that proximity allowed skills, information, materials, and customers to circulate more efficiently. Long before concepts such as supply chain optimization or knowledge spillovers existed, the guild streets were already putting those principles into practice. These neighborhoods gradually evolved into organized guilds that maintained professional standards, protected commercial interests, settled disputes, and preserved specialized knowledge across generations. Members often shared temples, festivals, and responsibilities to their ancestral villages, making business, community, and tradition inseparable. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Thang Long's commercial center had become a network of specialized streets known far beyond the capital. Merchants arriving from distant provinces no longer saw a confusing marketplace, but a carefully organized economic landscape where every profession occupied its own territory. What began as a practical response to migration evolved into one of the world's most enduring systems of urban specialization. The remarkable question, however, is not simply why this system survived, but why placing dozens of competitors on the same street ultimately made every one of them more successful. If the streets of medieval Hanoi had simply grouped similar craftsmen together, the Old Quarter would still be an impressive example of urban planning. What made it one of Southeast Asia's most successful commercial systems, however, was the extraordinary degree of specialization that developed over time, creating an environment where businesses benefited from the success of their direct competitors rather than feared it. At first, this seems to contradict basic commercial logic. Modern businesses often avoid rivals by establishing exclusive territories or opening stores far apart. Medieval Hanoi did the opposite. Silversmiths settled beside other silversmiths, silk merchants clustered with textile traders, and papermakers worked alongside workshops producing similar goods. Rather than dispersing across the city, entire professions concentrated into dense commercial districts whose reputations grew stronger with every new workshop. The reason becomes obvious from the perspective of a visiting merchant. Instead of searching an unfamiliar city, buyers could go directly to the street known for the product they needed and compare dozens of workshops offering different prices, quality, and production capacity. Someone seeking ceremonial silverware or silk could negotiate with multiple craftsmen in a single visit, saving both time and uncertainty. This created a powerful economic cycle. As more buyers visited a specialized street, more craftsmen established workshops there. Greater competition attracted even more customers by offering better quality, wider selection, and competitive prices. Every new business strengthened the marketplace rather than weakening it, making specialization itself the engine of growth. The benefits extended beyond sales. Production became more efficient because every stage of manufacturing operated within walking distance. Silversmiths could obtain raw materials, engraving services, or tools from nearby workshops. Textile merchants worked alongside dyers, tailors, and fabric suppliers, while makers of religious objects clustered near sellers of incense and ceremonial paper. The district functioned as a compact supply chain where transportation costs and delays were kept to a minimum. Knowledge moved just as efficiently as materials. Medieval manufacturing depended on practical experience rather than formal education. When skilled craftsmen worked side by side, techniques spread through observation, apprenticeships, conversation, and everyday cooperation. Apprentices changed employers, suppliers served multiple workshops, and guild members met regularly through festivals, religious ceremonies, and community life. Innovation became a collective process driven by proximity. Competition also strengthened the system. Because customers could compare neighboring workshops, every craftsman had a strong incentive to improve quality and reputation. Poor workmanship was quickly exposed, while exceptional skill attracted buyers from across the region, raising the prestige of the entire district. Instead of lowering standards, intense competition steadily increased them. Centuries before economists developed theories of industrial clustering, Hanoi had already demonstrated one of its central principles. Productivity rises when businesses sharing suppliers, skills, labor, and customers operate close together. Modern technology hubs such as Silicon Valley, London's financial district, and Milan's luxury fashion quarter all rely on the same idea. Hanoi's guild streets achieved it centuries earlier through the accumulated decisions of generations of craftsmen rather than corporate strategy or government planning. Yet geography alone cannot explain the Old Quarter's success. Concentrating hundreds of competing workshops inevitably created disputes over quality, prices, apprenticeships, and commercial ethics. The fact that this dense marketplace remained stable for centuries suggests another system operating beneath it. One based not on streets or buildings, but on institutions that regulated trust, preserved knowledge, and transformed individual craftsmen into highly organized professional communities. The remarkable efficiency of Hanoi's guild streets did not exist simply because craftsmen worked close together. Competition alone rarely creates stability over centuries. Without institutions that resolved disputes, maintained standards, and protected reputation, even successful commercial districts eventually declined. The longevity of Hanoi's specialized streets suggests that another layer of organization existed beneath the marketplace, one that governed relationships rather than buildings. That hidden framework was the guild. Unlike modern trade associations, the guilds of Thang long shaped nearly every aspect of a craftsman's life. Membership was more than a professional affiliation. It meant belonging to a community whose success depended on cooperation as much as competition. A silversmith was connected not only to customers and suppliers, but also to fellow artisans, apprentices, religious institutions, ancestral traditions, and often the same village from which generations of craftsmen had migrated. Business, family, and identity became deeply intertwined, creating powerful networks of trust. For newcomers, these communities provided opportunities that were almost impossible to find alone. Apprentices learned through years of direct experience under master craftsmen rather than formal schools. Techniques refined over generations were passed from one person to another through observation, repetition, and practice. Skills were not simply bought. They were earned through acceptance into a professional community that carefully protected its expertise. Guilds also acted as guardians of quality. In a marketplace where customers could compare dozens of workshops, reputation became one of the most valuable forms of capital. A poorly made product damaged not only one craftsman, but the reputation of the entire street. Experienced artisans, therefore, had a shared interest in maintaining standards that protected public trust. While the rules differed between trades, the principle remained the same. Individual success depended on the credibility of the community. Cooperation extended beyond quality control. Craftsmen shared suppliers, exchanged specialized tools, collaborated on large commissions, and supported one another during illness or financial hardship. Because workshops often stayed within the same families for generations, business relationships became long-term partnerships built on trust rather than formal contracts. This reduced commercial risk, allowed credit to circulate more freely, and made trade more efficient. Religion reinforced these economic ties. Many guilds maintained communal temples dedicated to patron deities, legendary founders, or respected ancestors. These temples served not only religious purposes, but also as meeting places where disputes were settled, decisions made, festivals organized, and traditions preserved. During ceremonies, craftsmen gathered not as rivals, but as members of a community whose prosperity depended on mutual cooperation. Perhaps the system's greatest strength was its resilience. Dynasties rose and fell. Wars disrupted trade. Floods threatened the city, while foreign merchants introduced new products and competition. Yet the guilds endured because they relied not on governments, but on relationships passed through families, apprenticeships, and local institutions. This social infrastructure made the Old Quarter far more than a marketplace. It became a self-organizing economic ecosystem where trust reduced commercial friction, knowledge accumulated across generations, and competition remained balanced by cooperation. Many principles now associated with innovation hubs, knowledge sharing, mentorship, reputation, and collaborative competition were already part of everyday life in Hanoi centuries before economists gave them names. The real test of this system came later. Foreign invasions, French colonial rule, revolution, devastating wars, and globalization all transformed Hanoi's political and physical landscape. Yet the ancient commercial logic of the guild streets adapted to every new era without ever completely disappearing. For most cities, surviving 1,000 years does not mean remaining recognizable. History constantly reshapes urban landscapes. Capitals are relocated, trade routes shift, foreign empires impose new systems, and old commercial districts often become museums or tourist attractions. By every historical precedent, Hanoi's guild streets should have suffered the same fate. Instead, they evolved. The first major challenge came through war and political change. Over the centuries, invasions repeatedly disrupted life in the capital. Workshops were damaged, trade declined, and many craftsmen left the city. Yet whenever stability returned, the same specialized neighborhoods revived. Their strength did not depend on buildings alone, but on knowledge preserved within families, guilds, and professional communities. A far greater transformation arrived in the 19th century under French colonial rule. Broad boulevards, European architecture, railways, and new administrative institutions reshaped Hanoi, creating a sharp contrast between the orderly French quarter and the medieval commercial district. From a distance, the city seemed divided into two different worlds. Many colonial officials viewed the Old Quarter as outdated and inefficient. Yet they soon discovered that replacing its commercial structure was far harder than redesigning its streets. The dense network of workshops, suppliers, customers, and family businesses continued functioning because it had evolved through centuries of practical adaptation rather than centralized planning. New districts could be built, but the relationships that made the guild streets successful could not. Ironically, modernization often strengthened the Old Quarter instead of weakening it. Railways and improved transport connected Hanoi to larger markets, bringing more raw materials into the city and expanding demand across French Indochina. Some workshops adopted modern equipment, while others adapted traditional crafts to changing consumer tastes. Rather than resisting modernization, many artisans embraced new technology while preserving the commercial networks that had sustained them for generations. The 20th century brought even greater challenges. Revolution, war, centralized planning, and economic hardship transformed Vietnam's economy. Private enterprise faced severe restrictions, and many businesses were forced to change or close. Yet the logic of specialization survived. Families preserved their technical knowledge even when markets collapsed. Workshops shifted from luxury goods to practical necessities, repaired equipment instead of producing new products, and adapted to changing demand. Street names remained, professional identities endured, and skills continued passing from one generation to the next. A dramatic revival began after the Doi Moi economic reforms of 1986. As Vietnam moved toward a market economy, private businesses regained the freedom to grow. Family workshops reopened, new enterprises appeared beside old ones, and tourism created an entirely new source of demand. Some traditional crafts returned, others evolved, but visitors still found streets where related businesses naturally clustered together, following patterns established centuries earlier. This continuity reveals something larger than historical preservation. The guild streets survived because they formed an economic system flexible enough to absorb technological change, political upheaval, and shifting consumer preferences without losing the advantages of specialization. Products changed, governments changed, and the city itself changed, but the commercial logic that encouraged similar businesses to cluster, cooperate, and compete remained intact. Today, that ancient system is more than a historical curiosity. Hanoi's Old Quarter stands as one of the clearest examples of how localized specialization can continue creating economic value in the 21st century, offering lessons that extend far beyond Vietnam. Walk through Hanoi's Old Quarter today, and it becomes clear that its greatest achievement is not simply surviving history, but continuing to function according to principles economists now consider essential for competitive cities. Tourists see history, architecture, and street food. Local businesses see something very different. Shop owners know exactly where suppliers are located. Contractors know which streets specialize in particular materials. Religious institutions know where ceremonial goods are made, while jewelers still work in districts whose reputations were built centuries ago. The Old Quarter remains an enormous information system where geography itself communicates economic knowledge. This solves one of the most expensive problems in any economy: finding reliable business partners. Economists call these hidden expenses transaction costs. Before goods can be produced or sold, businesses must find suppliers, compare prices, verify quality, negotiate agreements, and build trust. In most large cities, these tasks consume significant time and money. Hanoi's guild streets reduce many of these costs automatically. Buyers know where to search, suppliers know where customers are concentrated, and generations of commercial reputation create trust before negotiations even begin. Clustering also creates another advantage. When dozens of businesses share the same industry, workers develop specialized skills because opportunities remain concentrated in one place. Apprentices can build careers without leaving the district. Suppliers grow alongside their customers, while repair services, transport, packaging, and finance naturally emerge around the same ecosystem. Every successful business creates opportunities for many others, multiplying economic activity. Urban economists describe these benefits as agglomeration economies. The same principle explains why Silicon Valley became a technology hub. Hollywood dominates filmmaking, London's financial district thrives, and Shenzhen leads electronics manufacturing. Productivity rises when specialized knowledge, suppliers, skilled labor, and customers remain close together. Remarkably, Hanoi achieved the same result without skyscrapers, venture capital, or multinational corporations. The Old Quarter evolved through centuries of gradual adaptation rather than centralized planning. Its narrow medieval streets follow the same economic logic as modern innovation districts. Proximity speeds communication. Dense supplier networks reduce costs. Competition raises standards. Reputation becomes a valuable asset, while knowledge spreads quickly through daily interaction. Customers themselves reinforce the system. Someone looking for silver, hardware, traditional medicine, or ceremonial supplies goes directly to the street known for that trade. Every customer strengthens the district's identity, encouraging more businesses from the same industry to locate nearby. The marketplace continuously organizes itself through countless individual decisions instead of constant government direction. This self-reinforcing cycle explains why the Old Quarter remains economically relevant despite online shopping, modern logistics, and digital payments. Physical clustering still offers advantages that virtual marketplaces struggle to replace. Face-to-face relationships build trust faster, specialized suppliers are easier to compare, and centuries of reputation cannot be recreated online. For modern Vietnam, the guild streets represent far more than a preserved historic district. They demonstrate how specialization, entrepreneurship, and dense commercial networks create long-term resilience. As Vietnam has become one of Asia's fastest-growing manufacturing economies, many of the same principles that shaped medieval Hanoi continue influencing new industries across the country. The connection between Hanoi's ancient marketplace and Vietnam's modern economic success is therefore much stronger than it first appears. The culture of specialization that once defined a handful of medieval streets ultimately became one of the defining strengths of the nation's economy. Vietnam's economic transformation is often described as one of the great success stories of the 21st century. Over the past few decades, the country has evolved from one of the world's poorest economies into one of Asia's fastest-growing manufacturing centers. Global companies now produce electronics, clothing, furniture, machinery, and consumer goods across Vietnam, while exports have expanded at remarkable speed. This success is usually explained by economic reforms, foreign investment, competitive labor costs, and integration into global supply chains. All of those factors matter, but they tell only part of the story. Beneath the impressive statistics lies a much older economic culture. Long before multinational corporations built factories in Vietnam, craftsmen had already developed a tradition of specialization. For centuries, villages became known for mastering a single craft: ceramics, silk weaving, bronze casting, woodworking, or lacquerware. Families accumulated expertise across generations, suppliers grew alongside producers, and local economies revolved around perfecting one particular product. The guild streets of Hanoi were the urban expression of that tradition. Rather than producing everything everywhere, the city concentrated expertise in specific neighborhoods. Success came from mastering one trade while relying on nearby specialists for everything else. This division of labor increased productivity long before economists gave it a name. Craftsmen understood that focusing on one skill often created greater prosperity than trying to do everything. Modern Vietnam still follows the same logic on a much larger scale. Different regions now specialize in furniture, electronics, textiles, footwear, ceramics, seafood processing, agriculture, or precision manufacturing. Industrial parks attract related businesses because suppliers, logistics companies, skilled workers, and supporting industries all benefit from staying close together. Today's factories rely on robotics and global investment rather than medieval workshops, but the underlying principle remains the same. Concentration creates efficiency. This continuity is more than historical coincidence. Economic culture often outlasts technological change. Many Vietnamese businesses remain family-owned, passing leadership and expertise across generations. Small and medium-sized companies cooperate through local supplier networks, regional specialization, and long-established business relationships. Trust continues to play a central role, while practical knowledge spreads through mentorship and professional communities as much as through formal education. Foreign companies entering Vietnam quickly benefit from these ecosystems. Instead of searching an entire country for suppliers, manufacturers focus on regions where similar industries are already concentrated, knowing they will find skilled workers, experienced subcontractors, infrastructure, and supporting businesses. In many ways, global corporations now organize themselves according to principles that Hanoi's guild streets demonstrated centuries ago. This helps explain Vietnam's rapid integration into global supply chains. The country did not have to create a culture of specialization from scratch because its foundations already existed. Modern factories and export zones operate on a far larger scale, but they still depend on accumulated expertise, dense supplier networks, collaborative competition, and communities closely connected to what they produce best. None of this means Vietnam's modern economy is simply a continuation of its medieval past. Today's businesses face challenges, from artificial intelligence and automation to global trade tensions, that craftsmen of the 11th century could never have imagined. Yet history often leaves behind habits that shape how societies respond to new circumstances. Hanoi's Old Quarter shows that specialization is not only an economic strategy, but also a cultural tradition that has repeatedly helped Vietnamese commerce adapt without losing its core strengths. Perhaps that is why the Old Quarter feels timeless. It is not a relic preserved outside history, but the visible foundation of an economic mindset that continues influencing Vietnam's future. To understand why those ancient streets still matter, however, we must step back one final time and ask what they reveal about the relationship between history, cities, and economic development itself. Cities often measure success by what they build next. They celebrate new financial districts, taller skylines, larger industrial parks, faster transportation, and ambitious plans for the future. Progress is often seen as replacing the old with the new. By that logic, Hanoi's Old Quarter seems difficult to explain. It is crowded, centuries old, and shaped long before modern economics existed. Yet it continues to embody principles that many of today's fastest-growing cities are trying to recreate. The greatest lesson of the Guild Streets is not that history should be preserved simply because it is old. Their value lies in showing that economic resilience depends as much on relationships as on infrastructure. Roads, buildings, and markets can be rebuilt, but networks of trust, accumulated knowledge, professional reputation, and specialized expertise take generations to form. Those invisible assets became Hanoi's greatest wealth, allowing its commercial districts to survive colonial rule, war, economic restructuring, and globalization without losing the logic that first made them successful. Modern economists increasingly recognize that prosperous cities require more than investment. Innovation flourishes where skilled people interact frequently, suppliers understand one another's needs, information moves quickly, and businesses benefit from operating close to others in the same field. Governments spend billions trying to create these conditions through technology parks, innovation districts, and startup ecosystems. Some succeed, many struggle, because while buildings can be planned, genuine business communities develop only through years of cooperation, trust, and adaptation. Hanoi offers a remarkable reminder that such communities cannot be created overnight. For nearly 1,000 years, its guild streets have functioned as a living economic organism rather than a frozen historical monument. Businesses have opened and closed. Traditional crafts have evolved. Tourism, digital commerce, and international trade have transformed the district. Yet beneath those changes, its core structure remains intact because the city continues organizing itself around specialized expertise, dense business networks, and the advantages of proximity. Perhaps that is why visitors leave the Old Quarter feeling they have experienced more than a historic neighborhood. Every workshop, temple, storefront, and alley forms part of an economic story that never truly ended. Unlike many preserved historic districts that function mainly as museums, Hanoi's commercial heart continues producing, trading, adapting, and evolving. History is not displayed behind glass. It remains part of everyday business. The lesson extends far beyond Vietnam. As cities search for stronger local economies, more resilient supply chains, and sustainable entrepreneurship, Hanoi quietly demonstrates that some of the most effective economic principles are neither revolutionary nor new. Specialization creates expertise. Proximity encourages cooperation. Trust reduces costs. Reputation grows over time. Communities that share knowledge become more adaptable when circumstances change. Modern economics has confirmed these ideas, but Hanoi's Old Quarter has practiced them for centuries. That continuity may be its greatest achievement. Streets have been rebuilt, governments replaced, and the goods sold in the shops transformed for each new generation. Yet the invisible rhythm established by the first guilds still shapes the district, guiding customers, connecting businesses, and reminding the city that its greatest competitive advantage was never monumental architecture or natural resources. It has always been people who mastered a craft, worked beside others who shared their knowledge, and together built an economy resilient enough to outlive empires. In Hanoi, the future was never created by abandoning the past. It was built by allowing centuries of skill, trust, and specialization to keep evolving, proving that some of the most modern economic ideas are simply ancient ones that never stopped working.